we go. Are you ready? You excited? I think this will work, actually. I think this is fine. Hello, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Amanda Farmer, and I'm a word gardener. I'm a middle school educator in the Bay Area, California. Right now I'm moving between schools. In the fall I'm going to be teaching 6th grade English and Social Studies and 8th grade Social Studies. I created this YouTube channel to be a resource for teachers who are transitioning to remote instruction and for parents and students who are transitioning to distance learning in the fall. Because so many schools are transitioning to distance learning in the fall instead of emergency response instruction, like I talked about in this YouTube video right here, I want to talk about how we're going to build community and promote school culture in our classes this fall. The normal icebreakers aren't going to work this year because of distance learning, so we're going to have to start thinking outside of the box. This fall, I'll be starting at a new school in a new school district, and I'll be teaching 6th graders who are starting at a new school and possibly at a new school district. I'm preparing as if none of my students know each other. So I have to figure out ways to build community and class culture even if the students can't be in the same room. Normally, I do all those fun icebreaker things with my students the first week. The think, pair, shares, the turn and talks, the stand, share, sit,
which you have to be careful if you say out loud in front of your students.
But we're gonna have to be creative this fall if we want our students to get to know one another. We're going to have to think very carefully about what kind of exercises and strategies we're going to use for the students to be able to get to know one another on Zoom or Google Meet or whichever video sharing platform you're using. Here are some things that I'm working on to use in my classes. This is by no means an exhaustive list, it's just a start of my brainstorming. I'm sure I'm going to be refining these ideas and adding to this list as we get closer to the start of school. I have about 6 weeks to figure out what we're doing at the beginning of the school year. So I want to hear what you're planning on doing this school year. Go ahead and leave a comment in the box below and let me know what your plans are for the first couple of weeks as we're getting to know our students and having them get to know one another. So for a few thoughts about video meetings. Our school site is going to be using Zoom to create classes that the students can attend. It's important for your students to be able to see and hear one another, so I recommend that they turn on their camera and audio settings and leave them on for the entirety of the meeting. Zoom lets the meeting host mute and unmute the participants. I recommend using this feature as you're getting to know your students for the first few weeks of class. Create a class culture from the start where your students know how they're supposed to behave during these Zoom meetings. As far as I know, Google Meet doesn't have this feature where you can turn your students' volume on and off unless something has changed. That's one of the reasons I don't recommend Google Meet for very young students. This is a feature in Zoom that I'm going to have to play around with a little bit. I've heard that students can mute or unmute themselves before you do a mass mute or unmute with your attendees in your meetings. Please leave a comment below and let me know if you've had that experience and let me know what your way of dealing with it is. The first time all of my class are in the same Zoom meeting at the same time, I'm gonna do a whip around where the students introduce themselves. I want them to tell me the correct pronunciation of their first and last name, what nickname they use, and what pronouns they use. I really want to know the correct pronunciation of their first and last names so that hopefully it'll get me a step closer to getting those names correct. I'm terrible with names. I tell my students every year I'm just going to be calling them Bob for the first 6 weeks of class. I had a student who wanted me to call him Bob the entire year. It was adorable. Pronouns. Elementary students should absolutely be introduced to pronouns, even though at this point in their lives, they may not know what pronouns they prefer. But secondary students may have a grasp on what their personal pronouns are. When we do our first class introductions, I want them to tell me what pronouns they prefer. These pronouns may be different from what I would assume by looking at them through Zoom or reading their name on my class roster. And the last thing in the world that I want to do in the first couple of weeks of school is make a student who uses pronouns different from what I would assume or what other people might assume. I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. So as we move around the class and do our whip around, I want correct pronunciations of their first and last name, any nicknames that they may use, and what their preferred pronouns are. I like the idea of making this a blanket across the entire class so that students who do use pronouns different from what we might think of won't feel uncomfortable introducing themselves and saying what pronouns they want us to use. At the school where I'll be starting in the fall, there are different tracks for the different students. So in my English and social studies classes, I'll have students who belong to different tracks. During that first meeting, when they introduce themselves by name, nickname, and pronoun, I also want them to tell me and their other classmates what track they belong to. This will be a good opportunity for the students to find one another and get to know who's in their track and who they might see in their elective classes. At this point, I think we'll probably end up doing some icebreaker questions. But for the whole class, I don't want them to be very personal questions. I want them to be questions that the students won't feel uncomfortable answering. Things like, what's your favorite animal? What's your favorite food? What's your favorite color? Not every student is going to have a favorite book or a favorite movie, and they might feel intimidated or uncomfortable saying what those things are in front of the whole group, fearing the judgment of their peers if they like something that not everyone else in the class does. I also plan on putting my students into cohorts this year. So each month, I'll put together a cohort of 5 students each. With my class, since I've got about 60 students, that'll make about 6 cohorts. The cohorts will be a good system so that the students can work together on group projects, can troubleshoot technology if they need to, and can work together on class assignments. For the first week, I'm going to give them cohort time so that they can get to know one another. I'm going to give them questions to answer. These will be a little bit more in depth. Favorite book, favorite video game, favorite YouTube channel. I also want them to talk about the things that they're looking forward to this year. I know it's a very weird start to the year because we're all going to be working from home, but it's good to look at what might be positive out of the whole situation. I also want the cohorts to come up with a name for their cohort, which is kind of exciting. If they all like narwhals, for example, they could be the narwhals. I imagine I'll probably have at least one Hamilton group. After the first month or so, after I've had a chance to get to know the students in my classes a little bit better, I can rearrange the cohorts so that they're not with the same group of 5 kids all year long. But we'll have to wait and see. I might want to wait 6 weeks before I rearrange. Just like seating arrangements in my classroom. I know there are some teachers who rearrange the seats every month, and I know there are some teachers who just leave them in alphabetical order all year long. I have a feeling that I'm going to want to change their cohorts quite frequently because I'm going to be doing a lot of group work this year in order to build that class community. And it's important to me that they get to know everyone in the class and not just the 4 or 5 people in their cohort. After they've gotten to know each other in the cohorts a little bit, it's important for them to start getting to know the technology that we're going to be using in our classroom. Since our classroom is basically virtual this year, there's going to be a lot of technology involved. My new district is a Google Suite for Education district, so we're going to start with Gmail, Google Classroom, Google Slides, and Google Docs. There are going to be other technologies that we used in our classroom, but for the first week, it's really important that they become very familiar with Google products, especially those students who come from a different district and haven't had a lot of exposure or experience with Google products before. I feel like it's really important not to overwhelm students by introducing too many different tools at once. So starting with Google Classroom and Google Slides will be beneficial. They can spend time getting to know that tool, getting to master it before they move on to another tool. So when we're in face-to-face learning, I know that some teachers have the students fill out an all about me paper or pennant banner, and then they put them up in their classroom. I've created a superhero all about me assignment that works really well when you're face-to-face with your students in your classroom. I'll link it in the description box below. I'm not sure how well that particular assignment will work during remote instruction and distance learning. If you decide that that's a good assignment for you to use in your class, put a comment down below so I know, and that way we can learn together. For my students this year, I'm going to have them fill out a pennant-sized slide in a Google slideshow with their name and fun facts about them. During one of the first few classes, I'm going to do a whip around where I share my screen with the slideshow prepared, and then each student in turn can explain what their pennant looks like, why they chose the pictures they did, and the fun things about them. And then If we end up back in the classroom before the end of the school year, I can print out that pennant slideshow and I can use it to decorate the room. So when the students arrive, they can see their work already up in the physical space of the classroom. One thing I really want to do is have my students all create a Bitmoji for themselves, and then they can use that on the slideshow. I also want an actual photograph of my students as well. Speaking of Google Slides, I'm also going to be introducing my students to my 40-book challenge. I'm also going to link that in the description box below so you can take a look. I have a video about my 40-book challenge. I'll link it in the iCard right up here. The basics of the 40-book challenge are, instead of counting pages or minutes that they're reading for things like SSR, they count the number of books that they've finished. The 40-book challenge slideshow gives them a place to keep track of all the books that they've read over the course of the year. One of the things I really like about the 40-book challenge is that it forces students to try new genres and expand their horizons. I think my site is planning on spending the first 2 weeks of school site-wide without any new academic content. We're going to be focusing on community building, school culture, social emotional growth, getting to know the Zoom schedule for classes, and getting used to the digital tools and technology that we're going to be using for school this year. The physical location of my site is closed until January at the very earliest. So we're gonna have a good 6 months of digital classes only. It's really important that my students get up and running as quickly as possible with the technology tools that we'll be using over the first semester. So another tech tool that I want my students to become familiar with as quickly as possible, as my partner teacher and I are planning on using it a lot with our 6th graders, is a site called Flipgrid. At the beginning of the year, I want my students to have quite a bit of time to fiddle around with Flipgrid and to figure out exactly the ins and outs of how we're going to be using it this year. If you want to know a little bit more about Flipgrid, you can check out the video that I posted right here. So for getting to know you, Flipgrid is going to be a great resource because the students get to hear and see one another. I always want to give my students as many opportunities to showcase their artistic ability as possible, and Flipgrid has some great tools for that.
Tools that students can use to put their personal flair on their videos.
For the first couple of weeks, I'm going to use Flipgrid at least once or twice so that the students can get used to using the platform. I'll give them an easy question to answer, most likely something completely non-academic, and then have them answer the question before viewing their peers' answers and responding to at least 3 of their peers, either by posting another video or using the comment feature. We're also going to be using Flipgrid for lit circles and for book reports and for book projects and for book reviews and for book. Having the first few assignments be non-academic and very laid back will be a good chance for the students to learn how to use Flipgrid, and it's going to be really good for me too, to get used to the platform and figure out exactly the best practices when it comes to assessment and grading. Phew, that's it. That's what I've been brainstorming to do in my classes this fall for remote instruction and distance learning. Traditional icebreakers and community builders might not work, but I think that we can put together some really great ideas to use in our classrooms this year. If you found this video to be informative, inspirational, or at least a little entertaining, please hit the thumbs up button below and share with your teacher friends who might find this information useful. I'd love to hear what you're working on your classes too. Please leave a comment below if you have ideas about how you're going to build community and school culture in your classes this fall. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you'll be notified whenever I post new content. Thanks for watching all the way through to the end of this video. I appreciate it more than I can say. Don't forget to tend your garden, and I'll catch you in the next video. Is that everything? I think that's everything. Really? Walker. A great way to make a video. All right, again, really? Animals. What are you doing? Don't drink that. Blah, blah, blah. That's fine. Blink, blink, blink. I really want to know the Krenek. Yeah, that's fine. didn't like that, but let's keep going.
Okay.
I don't like that at all. I don't like that at all. No. Okay, speaking in their environments. In their environments? What is that?